Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to On Texas Football and welcome back to Football Theory. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers, pleased to be joined by the newest member of the On Texas Football family, my friend and now co-worker, the man who needs no introduction, our own Jeff Howe. And on Football Theory, we previewed it, or I should say maybe we told the folks that we were going a little sneak peek that we were going to talk about the new special assistant to the head coach for Texas, Neil Brown. So that's what we'll get into today. We'll actually get into the role of the special assistant, some of these special assistants to the head coach that Sark has previously had, and the impact that they may have had on the strategy and different phases of the game for Texas. And then we'll dive into the 2025 special assistants and their roles with the team potentially. Before we do any of that, though, let's thank our fantastic sponsor for Football Theory. As always, Football Theory brought to you by accomplished Austin realtor Laura Baker. Laura and the Andy Allen team at Keller Williams can handle all of your real estate needs in the Austin area. Laura is not only a diehard Longhorn fan, but a longtime Austin real estate expert. So please give her a shout today. You can give her a call, 512-784-0505, or you can reach out to her via email at laura@andyallenteam.com. That's laura@andyallenteam.com. Or like I said, you can reach out as well, just giving her a call, 512-784-0505. So thank you very much to Laura Baker and her team for being a part of our team here at On Texas Football and sponsoring Football Theory. She's been actually down with Football Theory since day one, so really appreciate Laura Baker. All right, and you will too if you have any questions, concerns about real estate in the Austin area. All right, Jeff, let's get right to it. The news dropped; it kind of went under the radar because there was a lot going on the 40 acres in the last couple of weeks. That Neil Brown would be given the title and the role of special assistant to the head coach. By the way, I just like that title. We don't actually, I mean, it just opened. There's so many different interpretations, I think, in so many different roles you can delegate to the special assistant. To me, I don't know what your definition of it, just from the recent history of it, because it's a rather new and unique role in college sports. I don't even know if it's more than 6 or 7 years old. I think it's the first time I've heard special assistant to the head coach. But I think it's a special projects thing. I believe that Sark looks at it as giving a guy special projects. And I have some examples to try to prove that. But that's just my theory about the special assistants, that they have special, unique roles. And Sark's like, no, I got this task for you. I need you to take care of this. Maybe that is game planning, strategy. But I think that's kind of what I see it as.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at how this has evolved, right, yep. Rod? Like if you look at it just at Texas, really, they didn't have specific titles. If you go back 12 years to 2013, when Mac brought Greg Robinson back as I don't remember if he was an analyst or a consultant, but that was kind of around the time you started hearing about Nick Saban bringing on former coaches and kind of building the army. And Mac did that with, like I said, with Greg Robinson, and they've just been kind of analysts. Has just been the title throughout the year. At some point, it changed. But really, when we really saw it take hold at Texas was with Gary Patterson. When Gary Patterson came in 2022, just getting that title, special assistant to the head coach. Which, what does it really mean? It means I'm not a full-time staff member because I'm getting paid by my former employer that probably just cut ties with me, and we, what's the term I'm looking for? Not a parting of the ways, but you were future endeavored by your employer. Well in your future endeavors. So. And GP being a former head coach, I think Sark just tried to milk everything possible out of Gary Patterson, whether it was game planning or film preparation, the practice set up, off-season workouts, recruiting. I think Sark just tried to pick up as much as he could with Gary Patterson. And at the time, Rod, even though we already knew Texas was going to the SEC at that point, I think a lot of that was Sark needed to bend Gary Patterson's ear, and so did PK about the culture of the Big 12. How did we misread this league? How did we get it wrong? What is this league really like? What are some of the tendencies of these coaches? Because you talk about the Big 12, and we've kind of gotten away from that now that Texas is in the SEC. But game planning in the Big 12 was more about playing the man than playing the hand. You brought that term up several years ago, and I like it. You've got to think of what are these coaches' tendencies, what does this situation dictate this coach might do. You got to study that guy. You got to study Mike Gundy. You got to study John Haycock. You got to study Chris Kleiman and come prepared with a game plan based on their tendencies. It's not just cut and dried football. So I think there was a lot of that. You look at going to 23, it was more specified. You bring in Paul Chryst for offense. You bring in Joe DeCamillis Yes, he helped with special teams, but he was Sean McVay's clock management guy. I remember 2022, the first 2 years, really, Sark really struggled with clock management.
Yep.
Like, think about it, Rod. If you remember, there were some like late half possessions where they might have scored, but it's like you wasted entirely too much time, and you're one play away from. You think about the Alabama game in 22, right? Just how clunky that last possession of the half was.
Oh, yeah.
Then you had to rush a field goal try. You missed a field goal, and in a 1-point loss, that ended up being really big. So you bring in Joe DeCamillis to help you with kind of the game management aspect. And then last year, you really just brought in Scotty Hazelton because we talked about it was a referendum year on Blake Gideon and Terry Joseph. You needed to be better in the secondary. Well, bring in Scotty Hazelton, who kind of speaks the same language as Gary Patterson, because we talked about the relationship with Gary Patterson and Pat Narduzzi, that they speak kind of the same football language in terms of what they value in coverages. Scotty Hazelton's kind of from that school, so bring him in to work with the nickels. Basically, I'm going to give my secondary as many resources as possible to be successful, because if they get right, we could have a championship defense. Turns out they got right, you had a championship defense. So we'll get into Neil Brown, what it means, Rob, but it's interesting. We've seen it evolve, and I think it's Sark taking a good, honest look at the year before. Okay, where do we really need to improve? And making those improvements to where, but with Gary Patterson, it was, we got it. We're 5-7. Everything can improve, to now we'll get into Neil Brown, but we'll see the areas where Neil Brown can specifically help Texas improve.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Going back to Gary Patterson, I think that's when, Sark kind of fell in love with the position of the special assistant, because Gary Patterson was so integral, specifically because he definitely gave PK some cliff notes, and PK kind of admitted it actually in one of those media availabilities during that Alamo Bowl. He said, and I make sure I got the quote, one of the things he's talking about Gary Patterson, one of the things he really helped with was playing match quarters. He said he's seen all the issues that teams tried to attack you with. He was really good at bringing those to our attention. We're seeing them in practice before they played the game. Sometimes they showed up and sometimes they didn't. Guys were seeing all those issues, and now they're able to self-correct because they know what issues and what offenses can do to try to attack pattern match quarters coverage. He said before Gary came on, we were more we were moving to match quarters, but we weren't there. We were more of a vision quarters team. They were more vision quarters, and they were more of a match thirds team. And you can go look at the coverage matrix. Gary Patterson last year at TCU, they ran quarters coverage probably 54% of the time, 53% of the time, right around that range. Texas in 2022, literally after Gary Patterson leaves and becomes a special assistant, Texas went from running cover four at around a 33% rate to over a 52% rate. So they were running a ton. It's most in the Big 12. So the two teams that ran the most quarters coverage in the Big 12 from 2021 to 2022 were teams that Gary Patterson was either the head coach of or the special assistant of. That is not a – so he did. He gave them the blueprint, and they weren't good at it in 2022. They were the best, basically the best match quarters, match third team in the country in 2024. So it took them a while to master it, but it was the key to defending, as you call them, the hybrid spread offenses in the Big 12. PK didn't know that early on. And he would have figured it out, by the way, but it would have took him like another season to figure it out. Gary Patterson was like, nah, bro, I got you. I got all the cliff notes. I got notebooks on every damn coach in the Big 12. You can have it. You're good. And I think that's what helped Texas accelerate that. So I think that's when Sark fell in love with it. And you're right. Hell, Gary Patterson probably had a lot of things on his plate, probably, advanced scouting, obviously helping with the coverage in the secondary and helping them evolve that. And then I think to me, what really stood out in 2023 among that group, you had it right, Joe DeCamillis, I love what you said about the clock management. That was on the money too. But the Paul Chryst one really stood out to me. Paul Chryst had as a head coach and as an offensive mind, had a history of extra O-line and kind of these jumbo packages that he would use in the Big Ten. And Texas actually that year kind of broke out some of them jumbo packages. When T'Vondre Sweat scored and Byron Murphy, guys like that. And they also used a lot of the 6 O-line package. They were using the 6 O-line package in 2022, but they weren't as efficient or proficient in the 6 O-line package as they were in 2023. With Paul Chryst as a special assistant and an offensive analyst, their 6 O-line package, Big 11, Big 12 as they called it, they increased their yards per attempt. Yards per attempt increased to 5 yards, over 5 yards per attempt. You increased your yards per attempt, and your yards per play you increased over 2 yards per play in your yards per play from 2022 to 2023 in the 6-0 line package. And the reason it was key is because it was a great way for Sark to match up with the 3 high defenses in the Big 12. It was one of his key concepts and most effective concepts versus the 3 high. So Paul Christopher, that really stood out to me too in terms of the schematic impact that these guys had. I know that Payam Sadat could be also included in that conversation, but I don't know if his impact to me stood out as much, but I'm sure he had one that we just couldn't quantify. And hell, to your point, they like Scotty Hazelton so much in his role as special assistant that hell, they end up making the nickel position a permanent coaching position on the staff. They thought it was so important. And the Chris Gilbert one is interesting too, because the special assistant is not only just an on-field role. Chris Gilbert, is the recruiting part of it, right? Former director of high school relations. We've talked about it ad nauseum, but behind Atlanta, DFW is the most fertile recruiting metro area in the country. And Chris Gilbert's a made man in DFW area, as you know, Jeff. And to me, that's his value as just a made man. He's the I got the hookup guy, or I know a guy in DFW. He's that dude. And you need that dude in DFW. And a lot of your stars, draftable talent, comes from that DFW area. Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill, Malik Muhammad, those kind of guys. So I think that's why Chris Gilbert is back-to-back special assistant to the head coach back-to-back years, because that's something that is invaluable to have connections in that area.
I think with him specifically, it's that kind of, if you go south of downtown Dallas, specifically like that I-20 corridor south, you're talking about Duncanville, DeSoto, Lancaster, where Chris Gilbert was from. I mean, you're talking about schools that produce a ton of NFL talent.
Man,
just in that part of DFW right there. South Oak Cliff is another school. So that whole part of DFW, that's Chris Gilbert's territory.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's like I said, because now that's how you know that the role of the special assistant, it is very expansive in terms of how you want to categorize it and define it. Because even at one point, Bill Rees was listed as well. Bill Rees he's just a scout essentially, right? It's just a scout. So he's got a scout in that role as well, at least in 2024. Along with a guy like Chris Gilbert and Scott Hazelton. So it could be a strategic, schematic role they play, or it could be something along the personnel department or scouting. I just think it's fascinating that Stark has kind of fallen in love with this position. So let's talk about the 2025 special assistants. And Chris Gilbert, of course, he will remain as one of those. But then they added 2 this year, Neil Brown. And you told me about, I didn't even realize Kerry Joseph was also in that title as well. Interesting. So it seems like he's going to try to have 3 year to year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Neil Brown, I think, is the most intriguing in terms of what his impact. We talked about obviously what Chris Gilbert's impact, and we can get into Kerry Joseph a little bit as well, because I think that is pretty compelling. But Neil Brown, there's no doubt that we all hypothesize the same role and impact for him in terms of what he can provide as a special assistant.
Well, I think it goes back to what I said earlier. Sark taking a good, honest, hard look at, okay, where did we fall short last year? Where do we need to improve? Well, the 2 big things on offense that stand out, one, your red zone offense. We talked about it. You were deplorable in the red zone offense. And you need to be more diverse, more dynamic, scheming up your run game to help an inexperienced offensive line, to help a running back room that's you're still trying to figure out where the pieces are going to fit. And, CJ Baxter getting back from the injury, Christian Clark coming back from the injury, Trey Wisner coming off 1,000-yard season, Jarrett Gibson, is he going to have the kind of spring where he makes steps forward? So you don't really know yet what the mix of your running back room is going to look like. Oh, and then by the way, you now have the threat of the quarterback run game with Arch Manning. Again, not that Sark is going to turn into Tom Herman or Urban Meyer and start running the quarterback 20 times a game. That's not what the Manning family signed up for Arch to go to Texas. But you have to respect the threat of Arch as a runner, And hopefully let's say, Rod, maybe 3 to 5 times a game in certain games where you need Arch to pull the ball and be a run threat. Hopefully at that point, you've got it worked up enough to where you have counters off of that. And you've got so much action that, you can get Arch about as clean of a path running the football as you can. Now you're gonna have to mix it up as the year goes on. But again, that you look at Neil Brown's background, and Neil Brown is really interesting because you got to remember he played wide receiver at Kentucky for Hal Mumme and Mike Leach.
He's an air raid now.
He is about as he's basically a son of the air raid. Forget a distant cousin or a tree. Neil Brown's a son of the air raid because he played for Mike Leach. He's in the Lincoln Riley, Seth Luttrell, that version of it, that form of it. Dana Holgorsen didn't play. You guys go.
Like he's in like the unfiltered version. You're talking the most raw, right? Version of the air raid. Yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
But Neil Brown, when I talked about the Big 12 having hybrid spread offenses, and I really saw that in 2019 as we saw Lincoln Riley, when he made the switch. Really, we started to see it with Kyler, but when he made the switch and they brought Jalen Hurts in out of the portal at quarterback, OU became, I don't want to say they were a run dominant offense, but it was a lot more split between their run pass balance and how that offense functioned with Jalen Hurts. There was more of a power element to it. Matt Wells and what they were doing at Texas Tech at the time, they were a hybrid spread offense. And Neil Brown, I looked at Neil Brown and what he brought to the table at West Virginia from his time at Troy. I'm like, this guy's a hybrid spread guy. He's got the air raid roots. He's got, you can identify some of those air raid concepts in a Neil Brown offense in the passing game, but he'll play with a fullback. He'll play with multiple tight ends. He'll run his quarterback. He'll do a lot of anti-air raid stuff, which makes him kind of a bizarro air raid guy in a way. But I just like how, you look at Neil Brown's foundation. I always like to look at offensive game. Really, in a coordinator talking about offense or defense. Like, where'd your foundation come from? He's got that air raid foundation, but with a power element to it. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, which is essentially philosophically, you can say that's what Sark wants to do at times, spread you out and then play bully ball from those spread formations. So I think Neil Brown, you hit the nail on the head, quarterback run game as a big infusion of creativity, innovation there from what we saw with him utilizing Garrett Green most recently. I mean, that guy was averaging like 10 carries a game in 2023. I think 12 rushes a game, something like that in 2024. Not that Arch Manning will be at those numbers, but just telling you how many different concepts they had to use in a designed quarterback run game. He'll have more than enough to offer up for Texas. And also the variety in the run game. I talk about it probably ad nauseum, so people are probably tired of hearing it. But, Texas last year got a little bit predictable in the run game. They became like a 60% zone running team toward the end of the year. Nothing wrong with that, but it was mostly outside zone. If you could stop their outside zone, which Ohio State did, which Arizona State did, Georgia obviously did. Texas really didn't have a way to pivot in the run game. I think that's what you want from Neil Brown. They ran a lot of power concepts there at West Virginia. Some modified counters. Their counter game was interesting. They would run kind of a zone counter at times too. So I just think they can bring some more variety to the Texas run game, because Texas run game, to me, they have all the plays. There's no doubt. I'm not saying they don't have these plays, but they have pretty much narrowed their focus in the run game the last couple of years. And I think it's just because they were really good at these concepts and their backs were really good at running certain things. And, the offensive line, you had 3 NFL tackles, which will be after this draft. And I think they were leaning on the strengths of the line, which were at the tackle. So they were running on the outside zone, trying to maximize those strengths. You're going to have different strengths on the O-line this year. A lot of variety in the backfield in terms of the different styles of running and the different skill sets in the backfield. And you'll have a mobile quarterback. So I expect this to be the most creative and diverse running game Texas had since Bijan and Rojo were back there. When they had Bijan and Rojo, they ran every damn thing because Bijan can run every damn thing. and he's good at it. And Rojo is right there with him.
Yeah.
I think this will be the most diverse running game since then. It could be more diverse. That'll probably depend more on the O-line than anything else.
Let's look at the analysts / special assistants. This is what I need from Neil Brown, Rod.
Mm-hmm.
I need him to be a lot more Paul Christ and a lot less Larry Fedora in his role.
Oh, man.
I need to feel the impact. I don't need him to just be here and the offense doesn't change. And we're looking at Neil Brown like 3 games in. It's like, what?
Oh.
We're looking at him like the Bobs in Office Space. Like, what would you say you do? Don't want that from Neil Brown. And I don't think Sark would have brought him in just to do that.
No.
For background, like Rod and I spent basically a whole offseason talking about, oh man, Larry Fedora with the spread background is gonna
theorize and all this stuff.
And no. I even said, after that LSU game, like, oh, maybe they just went bland just to see talent for talent. Like, no, that was the offense. That was just what it is. Don't you see that from Neil Brown? But I'll tell you what, Rod, I want to get your thoughts on this too. I think this spring, Jordan Washington's injury can be a blessing in disguise if Spencer Shannon's your inline guy, which he's getting all the reps to ones at this point.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be your inline guy. Now you can figure out kind of your base run game concepts with an inline tight end. That's one thing. 2, now you're kind of forced to experiment with the 6-0 line package and figure out who that guy is going to be because you're down a tight end.
Yeah.
2, because, we'll see Christian Clark. We know he's back on the practice field. Now, has he been cleared for contact? What's he going to do? That remains to be seen. But you can experiment with the pony package too. And you've got enough personnel back there between, like I said, depending on Christian Clark, even though you don't have CJ Baxter back yet, you got Jarrett Gibson, you got Trey Wisner, you got James Simon, you got Ricky Stewart. You've got enough bodies to where hopefully you get to a point where when you get to camp, it's like, hey, we'll just find roles for Jordan Washington and Nick Townsend. Jordan Washington's already got a role, but it'll make it easier if you can figure out kind of your foundation of who you are as a run game. It'll make it a lot easier to bring a guy like Nick Townsend along and say, hey, we by the end of spring, they need to know what Nick Townsend's role is going to be. I think they can get there.
No, if necessity is the mother of invention, then Sark might have to get really, really creative, right? And really, really innovative. If you don't have access to, you got to have 2 tight ends. He likes to run 12 personnel a ton. That's the second most utilized personnel grouping behind 11 personnel. 1 back, 1 tight end is 1 back, 2 tight ends. If you ain't got 2 tight ends, then what do you do to supplement? I'm with you. I love that pony package idea. Love the Big 11, Big 12 package idea. Let's see if Sark can get creative. We know he's got it in him, but if he has to, let's see if he can get creative there.
I know he wants to teach, Rod, but I'm a firm believer that spring ball is the time where you can sit in the office and throw a lot of what at the wall and see what sticks. That's a big part of what spring ball. To me, that's a big part of what spring ball is all about.
Yeah, it should be experiment. If you're going to experiment with something, now's the time to do it. But real quick, before we get out of here, you also brought up Kerry Joseph and his role. I was interested to find out from you that he actually is doing a little bit of work on the defensive side of the ball as well. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I remember bringing up his background was that in the NFL, the brief time he was there, trust me, I was there a brief time as well. He actually was a defensive back. And then in Canada, he went to Canada and started playing quarterback again, played quarterback in college. The NFL thought he was just athletic enough, put him at DB, and then he went to play quarterback in the CFL. First of all, I love that because I think he's got a very expansive knowledge of football, being able to play both offense and quarterback, not the way, the most cerebral position, and play DB at a really high level in the NFL. So I bet it not only knows ball, but knows it from a lot of different angles and phases. What do you think hypothesizing, theorizing his role could be?
So his official title is special assistant to the head coach defense. So I didn't know, and I know like some of the clickbait people like, oh, Arch Manning got a new coach. Like, no, we didn't know what Kerry Joseph's role was going to be when he was hired. But now that we know, like you said, he played DB in the NFL, goes to Canada and plays quarterback. His time as an assistant coach at the pro level, he's been on the offensive, whether it was in college or the NFL, he's been on offense, either as a quarterbacks coach, pass game coordinator, wide receivers coaches. Last year, he was the quarterbacks coach for the Bears. So, but now you're going to flip him over on defense. And I think this is just going to give, I think as this is just my theory, football theory, right? We hypothesize, we theorize. I think as PK gets into this role, remember they brought in Leon Clark to coach edges, and if PK's still he still makes his way around the field during individual. It's not like he's sitting up in the observation tower, like just hanging out, drinking Gatorade during practice. But I think as he shifts into this role, Rod, of being mainly just the coordinator, I think you give him a guy that understands football at the highest level on both sides of the ball. You give him that guy to where he can have somebody to bounce things off of. Remember, that was a big part of Sark bringing in Gary Patterson.
Yeah.
Hey, just you and PK just get in the meeting room and just
work it out.
Just talk. And I think as PK makes this transition, which it's a pretty big transition for him, not being a position coach per se and just being the coordinator. So I like having Kerry Joseph, who, hey, if there's not a lot he hasn't seen in a game of football.
Exactly. I'm with you on that.
So, I do like the fact. And, as I start looking at his background, he was with the Seahawks in 2020, 2021, 2022, 23. So for 4 years, even though PK in 21 had already moved on to Texas, I do wonder, kind of that Sark, Dan Quinn, Pete Carroll,
good point,
kind of coaching lineage, if you will. How much of that this is a guy, and it could have been a deal, and I don't know. I'm interested to ask Sark this. Is it a deal where Kerry Joseph, the Bears made that transition so late that maybe Pete Carroll and Dan Quinn were both like, hey, we don't have anything for you, but you know what? It can really benefit you if you want to go coach college. We can call Sark. See if Sark
I know a guy. Yeah, I know a guy.
Exactly. Yeah. And hey, look, there's a lot of places, a lot of worse places than Austin, Texas, Rod, where you can sit back and figure out what's next for me in football. Well, while I figure that out, I'm going to see if I can help Texas win some championships.
No, I love that. I call it the Belichickian theory. People who have experience in more than one phase of the game. I think it gives you expansive knowledge. I love it. I love that idea. I love that theory because I think he could just reverse engineer game plans for you. Reverse engineer game plans, kind of help you self-scout a little bit better because he can look at it from an offensive perspective. I think that's brilliant. All right, good stuff, Jeff, as always. Let's thank our sponsor, Laura Baker, one more time before we end the show here. Laura Baker, the accomplished Austin realtor, Laura Baker, sponsoring Football Theory, and we're grateful for that. If you have any concerns regarding real estate in the Austin area, you need to reach out to her ASAP. Laura and the Andy Allen team at Keller Williams can handle all of your real estate needs in the Austin area. Laura is not only a diehard Longhorn fan, but a longtime Austin real estate expert. So please give her a shout today, 512-784-0505. You see the number right there on your screen. Or you can reach out to her via email, laura@andyallenteam.com, and you can reach out to her that way. So thank you very much to Laura Baker and her team for being a part of our team here at On Texas Football. And thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you, man. I leave here a smarter football theorist because of our conversations and discourse. Thank you to Matthew behind the scenes, twisting and tweaking the dials. And thank you to all of you guys out there for watching and listening. And thank you to accomplished Austin realtor Laura Baker for sponsoring Football Theory. And until next time, for Jeff and for Matthew and for Laura Baker, I'm Lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. Hook 'em horns.